Hello and thanks for stopping by. This is Werewolf Simulator for the Commodore 64. It's also referred to as Lugaroo and was published in 1988 by Top 10 Software. It was released on a variety of different home computers of the 80s, including the Amstrad and the ZX Spectrum. In this game, you are a reporter tasked with investigating a few mysterious deaths. This all just sounds like basic storylines from the 80s to me, so I guess there's nothing too spectacular about that. This is a text adventure basically, but there are graphics. Although I didn't play this one when I was younger, this is the type of game I would have played when I was a kid, and I've played many similar games back in the day. Every scene you access in this game gives you a text blurb of some sort that describes what's happening, and a graphic window in the center, of course, has some rudimentary setting details. You don't interact with this type of game using a mouse or joystick. Mice didn't exist for systems back then for the most part, or at least not for the Commodore that I had. But here it's all about typing in the right text to advance the story. The text-based game was made popular in the late 70s and early 80s with games like Zork, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and The Lurking Horror. Getting graphics inserted into a game like this, it kind of seems like a logical evolution to me, but in this case there is really not much to do with the graphics to begin with. There's no point and click here, it's really just text. If we're talking about text games, it's important to note that every game seemed to have slight variations on what you could actually use for input commands, and I always found that even in the game manuals, they probably aren't going to give you a complete list of all the commands that you could use in the game. This one's no different. So, a game like this becomes partially trial and error, and sometimes you have to resort to the most basic commands that you can figure. The most basic ones, I think, that are pretty much universal for all games of this type, the directional commands. N for north, S for south, east and west, up and down, that sort of a deal. In most cases, you could also abbreviate them to just be the letters. N should be sufficient, S should be sufficient. Also, some of the basic words you'd expect to use. Get, take, use, and look. These were pretty common. Also, it's important to pay attention to the words and spellings that the computer gives you in its descriptions. These are always something that has to be matched up exactly. As far as the graphics go, we get some pretty dull graphics and some pretty boring colors associated with them. But this was the Commodore 64, and sometimes they would restrict certain areas of development to increase development in other areas, so getting bland colors in a game like this, not so unusual. I've always found this type of text game to be pretty amusing overall. When I was a kid, I never did finish these though, not usually anyway. They seem to have really high levels of difficulty. Remember, these types of games were back in the 80s, and back then the internet didn't really exist. What we did have were possibly bulletin boards, but those were just text-based, and even though the Commodore 64 could connect to these, I don't think we ever did with our Commodore. This was rudimentary internet stuff here, really basic, and I'm not even sure if there would be answers for a game like this on a bulletin board. I guess it's possible, but I guess overall it's important to note there was no place to go. You couldn't just hop on the internet and get answers for a game like this. You had to sit and pay attention to the game and do your best. Also, this is actually quite an obscure game, it seems. I can't find any real walkthroughs online, or at least not in my search. There are some videos on YouTube, at least one video I've seen. That's about all I could find. In this game, the part I find difficult is the directions. I find myself getting really confused with figuring out where to go. Yes, we have the standard north, south, east, and west, but I swear, in some places, if I keep heading north, I will wrap back around in this universe. As a result, at least for this game, I find myself trying to do my best to cluster the main areas I need to go, and if I know I need to get there, I'm just going to wander around the map until hopefully I stumble upon it. It makes it kind of difficult to get engaged with this game. The story starts out with you in your apartment, and eventually you have to make your way to different areas of the game to advance the story. You'll need to get to the library, the city records, the police station, hospital, library. I believe there's also a jewelry store in there. There's a doctor's office. You have to go to these areas and do something rudimentary to move on to the next zone. Pretty normal text-based stuff, I think. What I have uncovered are most of the basic words, I think, that work with this game. Besides knowing how to go through the compass points, really, and using up and down to get up and down stairs, the basic commands I found are take, look, knock, speak, search, read, ask, and INV for inventory. Overall, I think this game could probably be finished in about 20 minutes if you knew exactly what to do. But you got to think about back in the day when this existed, when this first came out, these types of games would probably take forever to solve. You have to worry about dealing with mistypes or commands that the game just doesn't understand. Depending on how good a game is, how good it was programmed, and what they expected to happen, you could easily trip this game up with your phrasing. In this game specifically, where I got stuck, the quote, "talk to doctor about murder," is not the same as "ask Willis about murder." That's confusing to me, because Willis is a doctor. I can't talk to the doctor, but I can talk to Willis. That's frustrating. So I've wandered around enough in this game to get through some basic things. I've read a book at the library on werewolves, I've talked to a doctor about a murder after I got the right phrasing, and I managed to buy silver from a jewelry store and a pentagram. Now I imagine the obvious is true here. This silver, somewhere in the game, you're going to transform the silver into a weapon, and you're going to use that to kill the werewolf. Pretty basic for me. I would be shocked if we didn't actually do that. For the most part, I'd have to say the graphics in this game, they're rudimentary, and generally, they are more distracting than helpful. If I see a couch, or a bed, or a rug in a room, I want to interact with it. You've put them there for a reason for me to look at, therefore there must be something there, right? Well, here, that's not really the case. What you see in the graphics are really just there to try to give you some background setting. They don't seem to be anything that's of any real importance to the game. At least not in the rooms in the areas that I've gone through, and I have to say I've probably gone through 30 or 40 different screens. My feeling is this is the type of game that most people will probably get frustrated after 15 or 20 minutes, because it's really hard to tell what to do sometimes, and it's hard to tell the type of progress you're actually making. By modern sensibilities, it's hard to want to sit down with the game like this, because basically you're going to be banging your head against a wall for long periods of time, hoping that you're going to stumble on correct phrasing. You'll enter a scene and you will know exactly what needs to be done, but you're not going to be able to do it if you don't know the exact words the game is looking for. You could try the same thing over and over again, but you spelled it wrong. You used a different verb, perhaps. Who knows? And this is not an unusual sentiment for text games in general, although better games will have more varied understanding of the different potential words and phrases you might substitute. It's interesting to have graphics in a game like this, but they're a distraction here. I've played similar games in the Commodore 64, and they only use graphics occasionally, maybe to show your demise at the end of the game when you fail, or maybe if you get to the win condition of the game, they'll give you a splash screen, some graphical picture. That scenario felt a little bit better to me. Here, I feel like it's just there to add confusion to the task at hand. Well, that's all I have for Werewolf Simulator, or Lugaroo, for the Commodore 64. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.